prices, as well as the Canadian dollar, and the reduced production that's happened this year as well, are all going to impact the provincial budget in a negative way, but we've been unable to get the Premier or the Finance Minister to clearly identify the amount. And based on our figures, if you just do the simple math based on what government has said in the recent budget, we're looking at close to almost a $1 billion deficit in this fiscal year, and that requires some hard decisions, but it also requires action.
So where do you start? So let's just do the obvious flip, and you're now at the seat of government and you have a position on the front bench. And this is what we're going to have to demand of Liberals and PCs very shortly, because enough of this popularity contest, by-election stuff, is what are you going to do then? Because it's easy enough to criticise what they've done to put us in this position, but a much harder task to turn the ship around, especially when there's some hard decisions to be made. So you go ahead and start the conversation. Where could a Liberal government make manoeuvres to control the spending, and where do you start with cuts and what have you, or borrowing, however you would proceed?
Well, I think what you got to do is look at the behavior. We're not in government pay. We don't know how bad the books are, and we won't know until we're there. But what I can tell you is when government spends money on things like, heating schools on the Northern Peninsula that are slated for demolition, and have been paying heating bills, $100,000 heating bills year over year, that's a waste of money. $22,000 to rent space for a by-election office for elections NL, that's a waste of money. Severance pay for MHAs who aren't fulfilling their mandate to their district is a place that we're wasting money. MHA pension plan, which needs to be changed and reformed, and Dwight has said publicly that that's one of the things that we would do, and we challenge the current Premier to say he'd do the same.
What would be included in that plan?
Well, we need to figure out a pension plan that's going to be sustainable. It's the most expensive portion of the 5 pension plans that are there now, and it's unacceptable. You can't have, the severance pay, you can't have MHAs who are leaving to take new jobs expecting to get severance pay. I just think people are telling us when we do our consultations on the economy, and we've talked to upwards of about 2,500 organizations that represent businesses and community groups, because we've been on the road doing the work, having the conversations for the last number of months. What people are telling us is that, they want the economy diversified. And when you look at where the jobs have been created, the number one employer in Newfoundland and Labrador, and some would argue rightly so, is healthcare. Well, that's an indication that the economy hasn't diversified enough, and that small and medium business growth hasn't happened the way it was supposed to happen. And we need to make sure that our small and medium businesses grow and are sustained, because when you have so much of your revenue dependent on oil royalties, or so much of your economy dependent on oil activity, and that price changes because of global pressures, we have to be able to lean on what we can do ourselves. And, whether it's issues around succession planning, generational wealth transfer, which is coming up regularly, that we're not training.
That's regulatory stuff, though, right?
But we're not training our young people in schools to be entrepreneurs and to go out and take managed risks in investing their money, and doing things that create 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. If you have a lot of small and medium businesses creating multiple jobs, that's really where you get the diversification of the economy. And I think what people are certainly concerned about, and what we hear all the time, is that this government isn't making the decisions that it needs to make.
Aren't they just 100,000-foot type of issues, though, Cathy? You talk about spurring on small and medium business. What does that mean? Because even teaching entrepreneurial spirit, some financial literacy in schools, a different approach to high school, and, faculty advisor type stuff, making sure that what you choose for post-secondary can help you get a job. But that's long-term solutions when we find ourselves in a right-now predicament. So give me some actual idea about how you spur on a small or medium-sized business, because we probably can't afford much more tax breaks, so we can't afford a whole lot of seed money. So how do we actually do it?
Well, a great idea would be that, when we're doing offshore oil and gas benefits agreements, is that we not only look at the jobs that we can create in the construction phase, but we also look at how we can diversify our business community to take advantage of the long-term service requirements that these vessels and these massive pieces of infrastructure have. And, when we look at developing technology, how do we leverage the fact that we're, in an environment where we have a lot of ocean technology? How do you not just create the idea, but then create the product that you can sell?
But is that the government's job, though, Cathy? You're a businesswoman. The government steps in and identifies gaps in service and supply. Like onshore, the real benefit to the province has been the service and supply industry, not the 5,000 people working directly for it. So what does government do to identify gaps? And plus, you're talking about deals that are once a decade, if that. So how does that actually equate to really diversifying or spreading the wealth? I don't quite get it.
Well, I think government's responsibility is to, and what we're hearing people telling us is that there's an unpredictability to government. There's been reactions and not necessarily proactive planning when it comes to how do we make sure that our services we've referred to it in our sessions, the widgets that we sell, that our widgets are the ones that people are buying the most of domestically here in our province, and that we can grow those global markets. I mean, we have to make sure that we're focusing on those really incredible sweet spots that are there. And if you look at some of the work that's being done in the IT industry in Newfoundland and Labrador right now, I mean, there's some incredible ideas that properly nurtured and properly supported can provide huge opportunities. I have a company in my district, a company called Verifin. It's done an amazing job of growing an idea into hundreds of jobs, hundreds of well-paid jobs right here in our province. And I think that, what we need to do is to figure out government isn't the solution, but government has to be the facilitator and the enabler to make sure that the paths to success don't have huge barriers.
Yeah, that was a Genesis Center, baby, wasn't it, Verifin?
It was.
And which is a great idea and has really brought a lot of big companies. Rudder is another one, I think, is a Genesis a baby as well. So if and when you inherit the government next year, we have an immediate problem with the long-term view on the price of oil. Even if it's just for 2 years or 5 years, we rely on that for a third of the Treasury. Are you willing, as a Liberal candidate, and will likely be a senior member of the government, to campaign on specific areas to cut, and not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but if you forecast $1 billion deficit, which means, in essence, we're either going to borrow it or we're going to cut $1 billion. And that requires way more harsh features than closing down vacant schools or selling them or repurposing them or what have you. So where do you come up with that stuff? And are you willing to campaign on those really serious, severe, drastic measures required?
Well, Patty, we've seen, the Auditor General's report recently stated that there was a 58% increase in government operating expenses over the last number of years. And, what we're going to have to do is to take a look at making sure that every dollar is working as hard as it can for the taxpayers and the people of the province. One thing I will say, though, is you used, and I know you were using it in jest when you said, when we inherit the government, it's not our job to inherit government. Our job as people who want to serve the public is to give them a clear platform when the general election is called, a platform that answers the questions on what a Liberal Party will do in government, and that platform will be ready when the election's called. The White has been building a team of leaders who have a really diverse resume combined amongst us all that can work together to make decisions and come up with solutions and ideas that allow things to happen quicker and more rapidly than have been happening for the last number of years. So
we just had 7 by-elections based on popularity contests, nothing concrete, given what you just said. And when I asked the Premier this morning...
I disagree that it was popular.
Well, it's only because it's even worse if you admit it's because they don't like the Tories.
No, I disagree that it was popularity contests. I think the voters, quite frankly, in the electorate are a lot more savvy than looking at popularity contests. I think they looked at, resumes and looked at what the experience was.
But with all due respect, that doesn't mean a row of beans.
But it does make a big difference when you have people in a room making decisions, making cabinet decisions, making caucus decisions, making legislative decisions. That amount of experience and that diverse experience really makes a difference to the quality of the decisions that government can make and that government should make.
But unlike in your own businesses where you can be any different level of risk adverse, when you're dealing with very finite opportunities for money and revenue streams, it's a little different, and I know you know that. Just one last question before we go. When I asked the Premier about why not go to the spring election, and his answer summarised is because the PCs aren't ready. And when we asked the Liberals for some ideas beyond some of the very vague ones we've had to refer to now. And you say, well, let go our policies when the writ is dropped. Does that not once again put you in the same boat as the Tories, as protecting your political fortunes and putting it before the interests of the people? So we can talk about ideas, we can talk about policy and vision, as opposed to the Tories are bad, the criticisms and vague overview, which has led to 7 Liberals being elected in by-elections and hasn't done anything for the rest of us.
Well, I think that the Premier has a responsibility to set the date for the election, and when he does, we'll be ready. You know, it's interesting that there's been a number of things in the last 2 years, 3 years, that have been discussed by Dwight as our leader or discussed by other members of our caucus that have, you know, filtered into or fed into the positions of the Tory leadership contenders over the summer, or the current Premier's, priority list. And that's great, because that means as an opposition, we're doing our jobs. We are creating the dialogue around the things that are important to the people of the province, and we're affecting change even in opposition. And that's our job. And when he decides to call a general election, you can be assured that we'll be ready to share with the people of the province exactly what having a Liberal government in Newfoundland and Labrador will mean for them.
And then to hit the ground running, as opposed to time to understand the realities of the fiscal restraints in the province, all those things which you've alluded to. And it's hard to know exactly what we're facing if you don't have full access, unencumbered access to the books. Cathy, I've enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate your time very much this morning.
Thank you for your time, Paddy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.